I am joined by fellow AEST TV host Lyle Shelton, whose show drops every Thursday at 10 p.m. right here on AEST TV. Click, subscribe, follow, do all the things, but make sure that you catch up with Lyle. Speaking of, welcome to Spectator TV, Lyle.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Great to be with you, and thanks for that plug.
Look, there is no getting around it. You had the cover piece in the magazine, and what a cover it was. Designed by Sarah Dudley and created by Ben Davis, it perfectly encapsulates the current social and moral situation in Australia. Your article, Gay Rex, essentially asks the reader to evaluate the moral state of our world. And has the slippery slope of progressive politics sent us into some pit of moral depravity? You wrote, and I quote, "Moral values fell out of fashion long before what we now know as woke became the controlling virus in the minds of our elites," end quote. Lyle, have we had another sexual revolution, and was it for the better?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, I think we have had another revolution, and we've had a big one that's been turbocharged since 2017 when the definition of marriage was changed in law and the gender diversity requirement was removed. That suddenly paved the way for all manner of things. And that Spectator cover that you referred to, designed by Ben and Sarah, depicts I guess a scene that's become very familiar, or someone dressed in familiar garb from the Mardi Gras, from the LGBTIQA plus political movement, and then with an animal next to them. This is very controversial because the sense is that anything now goes, and that's the subject matter of the article, which is, I must say, unsavoury, but unfortunately it's where we've got to.
Well, while some religious groups are not keen on homosexuality, particularly it is worth adding those of the Islamic faith residing within Labor seats, the majority of Australians are on board with legalising same-sex marriage, including a lot of the Christian community. That was reflected in the vote, which saw Conservative, Liberal-held seats predominantly voting yes to same-sex marriage. So that's all fine. What they are concerned about is this bizarre and rapid slide into increasingly aggressive and divergent sexual behaviours, to the point that we now have thruples and quadruples, or whatever they are, promoted as normal. Bestiality is openly discussed, including in schools. There have been several high-profile international social media influencers casually talking about the normalisation of romantic relationships with children. So suddenly these topics have gone from hiding in the shadows to wandering onto children's social media feeds. Is society redrawing the moral line in the sand, or do we see regular people starting to speak up and wanting to re-establish the line of morality?
Yes, I think it has, and notwithstanding what you said about the apparent public support for redefining marriage, I think if there had been a proper debate at the time, people might have thought differently. But of course, at the time, we were told by those that were pushing for same-sex marriage that it was love is love, wouldn't affect anyone else's relationships. It was just about two people, nothing to see here. But I was one of the people involved in the No campaign, and we said, well, hang on, this is going to lead to radical LGBTIQA plus concepts being taught in schools. It's going to lead to an erosion of parental rights. It's going to lead to gender fluid ideology being taught to children. Now, of course, all that's happened much quicker than people like me even thought. And it's not just wandering into children's social media feeds, it's now wandering into their classrooms. And not just the things that I just mentioned, but as you just alluded to, bestiality itself, which of course is the subject of the cover article in The Spectator, with the radical LGBTIQA plus activist dressed in kink with his dog sitting next to him. And this relates to an incident at Renmark High School in South Australia, reported by the ABC, which perhaps shouldn't pull the plug on them after all, about Year 9 students being taught about bestiality in an LGBTIQA plus respectful relationships class. And that disturbed those girls enormously, and they went to the media. And I guess it just proves the point that we were making. If you completely strip away all sense of morality, and in the case of the 2017 marriage plebiscite, the gender diversity requirement for marriage, then suddenly anything does go, and it is going, and it's winding up in the classroom.
Now, of course, the school said that they were unaware of what was being taught in this topic in front of the children, and they made an apology to the parents and the children at the time. And there is an investigation into what happened, but it still happened. Progressive politics has made taboo into a trending topic. So an entire generation has decided to compete socially with their identity instead of economically with merit. So there's a lot of kids these days who pour as much time and energy into creating divergent behaviour for social media fame as you or I would put into, say, our work. So there's a frenzy of voices desperate for meaning, and they are finding that meaning in these behaviours. Lyle, is it my imagination, or are we almost regressing back to sort of what religion was like a few thousand years ago?
Well, I'm not sure what it was like a few thousand years ago, before the advent of Christianity. If you read Tom Holland's excellent book Dominion, which is a history of Christianity, that the pagan world was chalk and cheese to what we know today. And it was violent, it was sexually depraved, anything went. But of course, that all changed dramatically with the advent of Christianity. And we've had sort of Christendom over the last 2,000 years, a basic set of moral standards. That's all started to unwind since the advent of the sexual revolution, and I would argue turbocharged since 2017. And it's not just, this one-off isolated instance at Renmark High School where, the school's saying, whoops, we didn't know about this. You had an LGBTIQA plus activist in there from Headspace, a third-party provider, providing the class for the children, telling the children that the plus in LGBTIQA plus means bestiality. That's what was said to those children. This is not just a one-off instance. We saw last year here in Sydney with World Pride. We had a whole month of pride and pride flags bedecking the whole city. On the websites advertising that festival, the Pride Amplified site, funded by Dominic Perrottet's Liberal government, in part funded by it with our taxpayer money, advertising animal fetish parties. Now, why is the taxpayer helping underwrite promotion of parties that promote the idea of sexuality with animals? This is depraved. It's hiding in plain sight, and it's made its way into children's classrooms. I don't think this is a one-off thing. I think this is part of the LGBTIQA plus agenda. And if it's not, the leaders of Equality Australia, which is what the same-sex marriage movement has become since 2017, they need to tell us what they mean, and whether what we saw at World Pride last year about animal sexual fetish parties and what happened at Renmark High School, are these just outliers and mistakes, or is this really part of what this movement is promoting?
Spiked online editor Brendan O'Neill told an audience in Sydney, and I quote, "The key problem is moral disarmament, the pushing aside of the core values that have held us together. There is a tendency to see wokeness as a joke, but it is becoming increasingly clear it is a threat to our society." End quote. Lyle, is he right? Are we still laughing at woke, or has the joke worn off?
The joke's definitely worn off. And look, I was amazed I was in that audience and heard Brendan O'Neill make those comments. He is someone who is at pains to say that he's not a Christian, he's not a religious person, he has a religious upbringing, I think, and some moral formation. But he is someone out there who's a prominent public intellectual saying we've got to morally rearm ourselves. We've got to have some basis of morality. Now, I think that applies right across a whole range of issues, including the area of sexual morality. And I guess society's got to decide where it draws the line. But I think it's fair to say that most thinking people, most mainstream Australians, would certainly draw the line at bestiality. But the point that Brendan was making is we have been disarmed morally, and this is a case in point. And I think we've got to have a good hard look at where our society is going, and that behoves every citizen.
Well, we're already seeing nations, particularly in the UK, pushing back against elements. So the general public have gone from being polite and tolerant to openly challenging some aspects of this ideology, such as the forced use of inaccurate pronouns. It's happening in Canada as well, where the crackdown for pronouns is all the more severe in Canada under Trudeau. Now, as far as I can tell, this pushback is not coming as a result of culture war giants like Konstantin Kisin and Jordan Peterson. It actually seems to be coming from fed-up, silent majorities in these country. So the mums and dads who have to deal with this stuff when their kids come home from school every day. So the real question is, do you think that this moral experiment with regards to sexuality in the LGBTQ plus community, and also I'd say the university sector, is it sustainable, or are we starting to see almost like a fad wear off where people are going, you know what, I think we might just take a chill on this one and go back to how we were before?
Yeah, I think it's overreached so badly. And of course, the examples I've cited about the bestiality at Renmark High School and World Pride, I mean, they're just outrageous. You've also got certain academics around the world talking about concepts like minor attracted persons, a way to sort of try and give a veneer of civility to pedophilia. I mean, this is horrific stuff. So this movement has overreached dramatically. Parents are fed up. Mainstream people are fed up. They're fed up being told what they can and can't say, what pronouns they must use. They're fed up with their kids being taught gender fluid ideology. And I think people are also realising there's actually something good and true and beautiful about the idea of marriage and in the way we've understood it traditionally. People might have voted for same-sex marriage, but I think most people realise that a child deserves the love of their mother and father wherever possible. That's made impossible by same-sex marriage. And of course, we've got the push from the rainbow political movement for commercial surrogacy, particularly for men. These are deeply unethical issues. This whole movement has taken us in a deeply unethical trajectory. And I think people are starting to wake up and realising, hang on, what really does fly under this rainbow flag? And perhaps as we're seeing things disintegrate around us, maybe we need to return to the good and the true and the beautiful if we want our civilization to survive. And I think that's the point that people like Constantine and Brendan O'Neill and others are saying.
Well, thank you for joining us here today on Spectator TV, Lyle.
Thank you so much, Ellie.